Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be showing you how to change the tension on your sewing machine, and this is big part of my beginner sewing series, and I hope it's helpful because I know for a fact that when I was younger and I first started sewing, I had no idea what tension was, I had no idea what it did, and I had no idea how to adjust it even if I knew what it was. So I'm stripping back to basics, and I'm really trying to create some really helpful videos for you if you are new to sewing, so you can just, whiz through them all, get to know your sewing machine and get sewing all those wonderful things that you want to make. So first, there's a couple of questions I want to answer because these are all things that I ask myself, I know other people ask themselves or ask the internet when they first get started. And obviously, to do with tension, there's still a few questions that you might need to know, like, what is tension? What does tension do? Where do you find it? All these things I'm going to answer in this video, so you can kind of just watch, gather the information, and then you can feel a lot more confident and comfortable about using your sewing machine, changing your tension, and you can set off and make all those beautiful things that you want. So number one, what does tension do? The tension controls the tightness of the stitches in your seams. For example, it is the amount of thread that's allowed through the sewing machine and through onto the fabric. The tighter the tension, the less thread comes through and makes the stitches tighter, more compressed to the fabric. The more thread that's allowed through the sewing machine, the looser the threads and the more lenient they are. So for example, if you're using very thin fabric, think of maybe satin. Satin's a very thin fabric. That would need less thread going through it. So then you can have tighter stitches, so you might require to move your tension tighter just to allow for no kind of big gaps or any like loose threads or anything like that while you're sewing. On the opposite end, if you're using thicker fabrics or doing things like quilting, then you might find that you need to change your tension to a looser tension, so then you've got more thread coming through the machine and being able to create those stitches at a more comfortable rate. Number two, where can you find the tension on your sewing machine? So for me, I have two sets of tension because I have a Bernina 1008. I have a bottom loading bobbin which comes with its own tension in itself, but the main tension that you need to pay attention to is located on the top, on the main interface of your sewing machine. For me, it's just here, but you will be able to see it, and I'll show some other pictures of other machines such as Brother and Janome where their tension can be found. Number three, why would I need to change the tension on my sewing machine? So you may need to change your tension for a couple of reasons. It can be down to the machine needing to change the tension, it's created itself a problem and you need to fix it. The other is the change in fabric, so instead of just using standard cotton that you might have been using, you might now be using something thinner or thicker which requires you to change the tension. Or something's happened to your machine and you just need to alter the tension to adjust to the new stitches. So the most common way is that you are changing up your fabric to a thinner one or a thicker one, and your tension needs to be changed for that. So if you are sticking with the same tension but you've gone to a thicker fabric, you can find that there's not enough thread going through the machine and through to the stitches to create the stitches within the fabric, and this can often cause it to gather up naturally, so it will be too tight. So then it kind of bunch up your fabric and your stitches and make it look untidy, and it just kind of like creates this mess and it's just not nice. It also can make the thread snap, so it can't cope with the tension. It can't cope with the tension that it's been put under, and it will often snap, and you'll find that every so often, every few stitches, it'll snap again. So that's a good sign that you need to adjust the tension to allow more thread coming through your machine to allow the stitches to be created. You may also need to change your tension if you are changing the style of thread you're using. So sometimes you can use a thinner thread, a elasticated thread, or even like a thicker thread for wool and other fabrics like that that require something a bit thicker and a bit more with a bit more stability. If that's the case, you also may need to change the tension to allow for the extra room of the thread to come through and create the stitches in the fabric. Again, with delicate fabrics, these tend to need less thread coming through because they are thinner, they don't need as much room to work with, and so you might find that you need when sewing on the normal tension or a looser tension that there'll be kind of like big loops created on the back or the front of the threads, and so that's a key indicator that you need to change the tension down to a tighter tension to allow the thread to be pulled taut again, and so you don't get those kind of like ruffles and kind of messiness on the back of your sewing. Number 5 is, can I change the tension back? Yes, of course. The tension is meant to be changed. It's meant to be adapted to whatever sewing, whatever project you are doing, whatever materials you're using. Tension is meant to be adjusted just as much as stitch length and, stitch style. The dial's there to be loosely manoeuvred and easily changed, so don't be scared to change it back, change it a little more, and always, always, always do a test run on your stitches before you move on to the main project. Number 6 is, how will I know if my tension needs altering? This is similar to what I just mentioned, is the fact that there's a few things that you'll know straight away that if your tension needs altering, from the excess of loops and messiness on the back of your fabric or even on the front. Sometimes when you do a back stitch, that can cause a load of like excess thread to come through and kind of get tangled up. Your thread actually breaking every so often, that's a key indicator that your tension is too tight. So play around to make sure that you've got a nice like test piece done before you start on your main project. So now I'm going to show you how to change the top tension. So the top tension is the dial that's on the main interface and fronting of your sewing machine, and mine is just located at the top here. It's got a red line which indicates the set tension which it will come as when you first buy your sewing machine, and that's the most recommended tension for across a number of different fabrics and projects. If you are to move the dial down and you go from 4 to 0, that's going from a tight tension all the way to the tightest tension you can do, and that's advised for thinner fabrics and if you want to create those tight stitches. If you move it back down, you'll notice that it goes from 6 all the way down to 10. They are your loose to loosest stitches. So this is if you are wanting to create something like a patchwork quilt and you've got quite a lot of layers, you need to let a lot more thread through to allow it to get over the bulk of the fabric. The dials are always really easy to use, really simple to move, and so you shouldn't have to worry about changing them and changing it back. Here's how to change the bottom tension. So as I mentioned before, I have a bottom loading bobbin on my machine, and so if you do, you will also have this kind of tension to change. This can be caused if you are sewing on your sewing machine flat and you notice a load of kind of on the bottom side of your fabric, you'll notice a lot of bunching, a lot of like kind of a lot of excess thread. This can be caused by the bottom tension not being set correctly. So you need to take out your bobbin and bobbin case, remove the bobbin from the case, and the case is as such. To one side, you'll notice that there is a small screw, and it's a flathead screw, and you'll notice that that is there for a reason, and you'll notice that there's like a plate that runs along that actually moves, so you can kind of squish it together a little and it'll move. So if you have a small screwdriver, you can adjust this section. If you tighten it just even, and I mean the smallest increments can make such a big difference to this tension. So when it comes to the bottom tension, make sure you do the most minor of adjustments, put it back together, thread it up and do a test stitch before you move on to your main project, because you might find that even the smallest adjustment you've done might be too tight or too loose for what you need. So do the smallest and smallest and smallest, I mean smallest of most minor adjustments to your bottom tension, as it can create a really big difference when coming back to doing your stitches. Thank you for joining me on this video. I hope you found it enjoyable, I hope you found it useful, and I hope you have been able to go away knowing a lot more about sewing machine tension. Be sure to check out more of my other beginner sewing series. I will leave a link to them here. Be sure to subscribe and like this video so you can keep up to more videos coming soon. Bye.